What's up, guys? So we're back with another video. Um, and today, what I want to talk to you guys about is something that's going on in our political climate right now. So, as you all know, we have our political spectrum. We have to the left, progressives, liberals, moderates, independents. Then you got modern Republicans, right wingers, and then you can go as far right as neo-fascist, white liberal, white supremacist, white nationalist. And there's been a much bigger bipartisan divide. I was talking to my dad a couple of days ago, and I'm like, back then when into like 2000 when Al Gore won, um, was there as big of a political divide as there was? And he's like, yeah, there's people who were contesting and stuff like that, but he said Al Gore, for the better of the country, that's the words he liked to use, said that we're just gonna go on, even though we didn't get the recount because of a little bit of partisanship that happened in Florida. I don't know all the details, but from what he was telling me, we're gonna move on and go. And obviously, we went through and we had George W. Bush, or W or HW, I forget. The son was the president. Um, and it's just interesting to see now how things can be very hyper partisan when it comes to a lot of issues. Abortion's a big one. Immigration's another big one that we have. There's some big issues that really polarize our country, and I think sometimes we need to take a step back and realize that there are things that we do agree on, and it's good to know what those things are that we all do agree on. And there's really five main things, especially with the coronavirus pandemic, that I've seen that I think that we as a whole group really do agree on. And so yeah, let's list those five things for you. Those five things that I think that Republicans and Democrats, liberals, um, conservatives, progressives, all agree on, really, I think are some form of limitation on the amount of time you can stay in government, um, ending the horrific wars that we have been in for these past 2 decades, and cutting that military budget to be redistributed into our people and help our American citizens, getting money out of politics when it comes to elections and inaugurations. Um, Fourth issue would be, we both agree on the left, on the right, that our government is very corrupt, and they try and pit the 99% of the people who are Democrats or Republicans against each other, when really it's 99% who should be fighting to ensure that the 1% aren't looting the treasury like they did with the CARES Act and aren't taking everything, all the money away from us, and effectively paying lower tax than the people who are poor and middle class. And the fifth thing that I think we can all agree on is our government using our tax money for benefiting us, especially in a time of crisis like now, is why the universal basic income, economic stimulus, and the government helping us financially is one of the key things that we need. And I think that conservatives and liberals can agree on those five things: having term limits, ending the wars, getting money out of politics, taxing the rich appropriately, and having our government support us economically during times of crisis and even times outside of crisis. Um, so sticking on the first point, um, so there are reasons why we can have term limits, and I think one of the reasons we should have term limits is you have people like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, just some of these old heads who have been in there for years and years, sorry, decades and decades on end, and they are kind of out of touch with what is going on. The average age of American in this country, last time I checked, is about 37 years old. And you have the Senate Majority Leader, Senate Minority Leader, the Speaker of the House, all being above the age of, I think it's 75, or Chuck Schumer maybe 74, but very old, 4 decades removed from the average age of the country. And I just think that either they need to start doing the things that we want, or we as a country need to put in term limits like we have for the presidential seat. The president only can serve 8 years, which makes sense. We don't want someone who's in there for a long time. I mean, it makes sense why we have that for the presidency. So for people who say, oh no, it wouldn't work for Congress, I would just need to understand why we would have it for the most powerful person in the world. but yet the people who are right under the most powerful person in our government wouldn't be subject to these term limits. And it's something that I think that Republicans and Democrats can both agree. And this really stems into the corruption and all the things that go on. Even in Arizona, there was a poll that they did for their elections that said 85% of Arizonans want congressional term limits. Um, and they believe that this will like make their legislative better. People who were for term limits had 81% of the voters were more likely to support that candidate. 67 were less likely to support someone who came out against it. And they're just saying how term limits could really be something that is useful because people are just fed up with the way that our government and Congress is doing things and running things and not helping regular citizens, you know? So that's the first point of term limits. While I think that the varying degree to what we agree, the number of years, I think that having a term limit for the presidency and then extrapolating that and putting that on our Congress people would immensely help people doing the things they need to do while they're in there and not just going in there and having political careers, building up wealth, and not supporting the people that they're supposed to support, which is their constituents in their congressional districts. And then we can see Americans really, on both sides, really do not feel that the war is something that they want to continue to be a part of. So here I have from, this is called the National Interest. They had a poll that they recently did. It looks like this poll was around from July 27th, from 24th to 27th of July 2020, so this past summer. And what they were able to find was that overall, 75% of Americans agree with the statement, the United States should prioritize domestic issues over foreign policy issues, while only 6% want the U.S. to prioritize foreign policy issues over domestic issues. 82% of Republicans agree with the first statement, only 4 opposed, while 75% of Democrats agreed and 6 disagreed. So you can see there's an overwhelming amount of support for making sure that our government and the United States prioritizes our people and our issues first before being in all these offensive and aggressive wars. It makes sense, and when we continue to be in these things that people don't want to be in these things, that's what gets people frustrated, and they start to feel abandoned by the system that's not listening to what they need. 82% of Republicans and 75% of Democrats agree. 74% of Americans support bringing U.S. troops home. Only 11 are opposed. 76% of Americans favor bringing U.S. troops home from Afghanistan. So as you can see, there's just a lot of support across the American people of wanting to get rid of these wars, which, I mean, just makes sense. Why would we want to go into another country and just continue to see all the bloodshed that happens with those people, the troops that don't come home, fighting a war for things that some people are fighting these wars and they aren't even born yet, you know? They weren't even born when these things started, and now they're still having to be in these wars. I'm, 21 years old, and I've only seen no war for our country since I was, 3 years old. It's ridiculous how long we've been in these wars, and people are sharing the same sentiment across the political spectrum, you know? So it's very eye-opening to see, and I think that's one thing that we as Democrats and Republicans need to push our people on, is getting out of these wars, because it's something that we both do not want. So going back, so we had the two I just talked about, the term limits, and then we had the war, and this war, and expanding on the war. When you have this war, it costs money. You see the military budget, discretionary spending, heavily skewed towards the military. We increased the military budget. I think it's at $784 billion or thereabouts this year. So it's just something that's becoming astronomical, and it's impacting our debt and our deficit, which I'll get into a little bit later as to why it's important. But before I get into that, I want to talk about money in politics, because that's the reason why we have people who are just staying in power and just continue to stay there, because they take these donations from people, and they don't do the things that people want. They do the things the corporations that be giving them tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to do. And when they go ahead and take those big donations, you think the people, the 500,000 people who give $50, or you think the one dude who gives $1 million, who do you think is going to be the guy they're going to do the bidding for, you know? So we need to have a cap on the system, which is what Bernie Sanders proposed in his platform when he was running for president. He wanted to cap at individual donations at 500. And he really said this because before, Democrats really did not used to be a party of taking this, but they realized they had to play the game and play the system, and they, even in themselves, as you can see in what I have here, Democrats used to rail against dark money, but now they're better at it than the GOP. So I'll link this article, and we can take a look at it. But Democrats are heavily outspending the GOP people in their um, when it comes to spending from corporations and super PACs and lobbyists, you know? And when those are the people who have the money, they're going to be able to influence our um, discourse and what gets done in our government. So it's an unfortunate situation that we have, and the only way is for Democrats and Republicans to align together and realize we need to get rid of Citizens United that started in 2010, and we need to really get that money out of politics if we want to see a shift in what policy is being enacted for the people. 2016, 17 donors gave three-quarters of the Democratic National Convention funding. And you see the party, some of the people there, Bank of America, Comcast, Facebook, donating absorbent amounts. And it just makes sense. If someone gives you more money to go ahead, and a lot of people are giving you a little bit of amount, well, that one dude who gave you a lot of money, there's chances are if you do some of the things he wants, he's going to give you more money again. And those things that he wants is usually against the interest of the people who is affected by what you do, you know? And we really need to change that course of action. And Americans agree. Pew Research Center shows this graph right here. Nearly two-thirds of Americans say new laws should be effective in reducing the role of money in politics. You can see 77% believe there should be limits on the amount of money individuals and groups can spend on campaigns. 65% say new laws should be written that would be effective in reducing the role of money in politics. This isn't something that only you think Democrats want. This is something that Democrats and Republicans want. They want to get this money that is corrupted our system and has put the power of the 1% in control of the laws and legislation that gets enacted. And we want to take that money and the influence that they have and put it into the other 99% of people whose voices need to be heard. Across the political spectrum, people agree on this issue very much. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy issued a report. In this report, they show that the poorest fifth of Americans, so 20% of Americans, will pay on average 10.9% of their income in state and local taxes. Middle fifth will pay 9.4%, but the top one will pay states and localities only 5.4% of the income in taxes. This shouldn't be a surprise, it says. Most state and local governments rely on regressive taxes, particularly sales and excise levies. Poor and middle class people pay more simply because they have to spend the bulk of their incomes just to cover the cost. People with less money, and when you have a tax system that's regressive or flat, or is not as progressive as it needs to be, if you need to spend money on taxes and you don't make that much money, more of your money is going to go to taxes. You know? If you have a lot more money, less is going to go. And the laws are written in a way where, okay, the richer people may be paying more in taxes. This article doesn't dispute that. The rich people pay more in taxes, but the percentage of their income that they pay is what is the problem. And laws have been crafted in order to ensure that that is the power structure that occurs when it comes to taxes specifically, which is why the rich are able to pay such a lower percentage, you know, because paying a lower percentage means that at the end you have a lot more money when you already begin with a lot more money. You know, even if they paid the same amount, 10% of $50,000 is a lot less than 10% of $50 million, you know? So it's unfortunate the situation that we're in, but it's the situation that we're in because of what has occurred in politics and how we've enabled the 1% and those people at the top in order to craft the laws based on their influence with money and power, you know? So Pew Research Center, I'm not going to go through all this here, but they say how they don't do enough for the middle class. And you can see here how even Republicans, 62% of Republicans believe that the parties favors the rich, while only 26% of Democrats say the same thing, which is surprising because you would think that, oh, lesser taxes, people know that Democrats are usually the people for lower taxes. But in this situation, what's occurred is that a lot of Republican people, they usually, I don't have the numbers in this, but they don't make as much on average. A lot of like the billionaires and stuff are Democratic people. More educated people are usually Democratic. So in order to make money, you need some level of skills, some level of knowledge. More people who go to college are in Democratic, so they're going to be able to make more money. Which is why you may see a graph such as the one I just showed. But more needs to be done to help the middle class. which is very true. 64% strongly or somewhat agree that the very rich should contribute an extra share of the total wealth each year to support public programs. Democrats 77%, and a majority of Republicans 53%, which is why I go ahead and go to say, which is Republicans and Democrats, while there may be a varying degree to how many agree, 53% is still a majority. It might be a small majority, but a majority of people, and even a majority of people in if you take the two parties, one party very strongly agrees, 3 out of every 4, but more than half of the party that would be less inclined to have the richer people pay more taxes believes that no, rich people should be paying more taxes, which is why we have to realize that there's a lot more unity when it comes to situation than we may think. So this lady said, Katie Heron, 56, a Republican who lives in Santa Rosa, California, said her support for Trump, a self-proclaimed billionaire, stems from hardline policies on legal immigration. In her view, the president would do well to support higher taxes on rich Americans. We're taxed from one end to the other, and it just seems the rich don't pay their share. So even though this lady supports Trump, and obviously Trump raised taxes with his 2017 tax cut, 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. We all know that. We all study that. Even though she supports Trump, and she supports it because of his illegal immigration policy, she's probably a person who is probably middle class or not rich. Is probably not a billionaire. And she supports taxes on the rich. So even these people who you think, oh, she's a Republican, she supports Trump. No, they still realize the importance of making sure that people pay their fair share in taxes in order to help all people. So even if I believe in Trump, I still think he should do more on taxing the rich. So even some of these hardcore Republican people that have these hardcore views, they still understand the importance of making sure that people are taxed at an acceptable rate that's going to help our country in the long run. Yeah, I think I want to cut it here.